Hi, I'm Eric with Bell Performance, thanking you for joining me for this edition of the Bell Video Blog. Today, we're going to talk about ethanol and the environment, and the fact that a new study by the Environmental Working Group has concluded that ethanol may not be helping the environment nearly as much as people thought. Now, for review, what we know about ethanol. Ethanol is an oxygenate. Ethanol is required by the Renewable Fuels Standard to be blended into the nation's fuel supply at a given amount during the year. That given amount has changed over the years. It has steadily increased. We're talking now in 2014, talking about 14.4 billion gallons of ethanol required to be blended into gasoline across the country. Now, ethanol increases the amount of oxygen in gasoline, ostensibly makes it burn cleaner with fewer greenhouse gases, and that's a good thing. Increasing the oxygen in gasoline, make it burn cleaner, that's a good thing. Taking sulfur out of diesel fuel to prevent acid rain, that is a good thing. However, what they found when they start looking at this a little bit closer is that benefit may not be as much as people think. And so you have the Environmental Working Group and a study they did where they looked at various aspects of what goes into ethanol production, and what they concluded was something that's really surprising to a lot of people, was that the ethanol mandate, the law that says you have to use 14 billion gallons of ethanol, that was actually, at least in their words, that if you were to scale that back, which is what Congress was considering, they said scaling back the ethanol mandate would lower greenhouse gases. That's the opposite of what people think. Scaling back the ethanol mandate would lower the amount of greenhouse gases going into the environment. Now, the flip side to that is requiring people to use greater amounts of ethanol has raised greenhouse gases going into the environment. Now, that's a big deal because that's counterintuitive and flies in the face of what everybody has assumed when they've been thinking about the environmental consequences of using ethanol. Because people know that ethanol, they get less mileage with ethanol. So it's the de facto result of that is that they pay more per gallon. They know that it hurts their small engines. It destroys lawnmowers. It attracts water. You can't store it for very long. But people have, as a general rule, put up with that because they know that it is better for the environment. Well, now all of a sudden the Environmental Working Group comes along and says, hold on a second, maybe it's not as good for the environment as we think. Okay, so the obvious question, if you're going to make that accusation, is, okay, show us why. Well, the Environmental Working Group said, look, it all has to do with land use. Okay. They studied land use from 2008 to 2011. 2008 is right about when the spike was really taking effect. Because of the tax policy for ethanol starting in 2006, 2007, that ethanol production, ethanol use is really rising sharply around that time. So they looked at the land use for farming. What they found is that if you create a market where corn is more valuable than it was before, what are farmers going to do? They're going to take as much land as they can, and they're going to convert it into land that can be used for growing what that most profitable commodity is. And so from 2008 to 2011, what they found is that farmers converted 23 million acres of wetlands and grasslands. They converted into farming land. And of that 23 million acres, 8 million acres of it was designated specifically for corn production to make ethanol. Now, to keep this in proper perspective, 23 million acres isn't a meaningful number to most people, but if you say they converted an area the size of the state of Indiana, which is what they did, now you realize we're talking about a rather large amount of land. Well, if you take a wetland or you take grassland, and you convert them from their old form into a form that's going to be growing corn, that's going to go into vehicle fuel, that's going to be burned, and those combustion components are going into the environment. Suddenly what you've done is you've taken land that was a net, it's subtracted from greenhouse gases by converting carbon dioxide into oxygen. You're taking that and moving it from that position to a position where it's essentially producing greenhouse gases. You do that for 8 million acres, and suddenly you have, as the Environmental Working Group calculated in their study, they said that this land conversion, 230 million metric tons of greenhouse gas increase, not total, increase. That's the balance that they were talking about, and that's the reason why the Environmental Working Group says, maybe we ought to rethink this a little bit. Maybe lowering the amount of ethanol blended into fuel would be a good thing for drivers, and maybe it would be better for the environment than you think, right? This is just another example of how things which look really simple, if you just scratch the surface of them, if you start to look at them a little bit more closely, you realize things are not quite as simple as they can be. So I guess the next step with this is we're still waiting on the final word from Congress and the EPA as far as what exactly they're going to do with the renewable fuel standards. We're hoping that they're going to scale it back a little bit. Some analysts are thinking maybe they're going to split the difference and just reduce the increase. So we'll see. Answers should be coming in, probably within the next month. So that's what we have for today. Thanks for joining me. If you want more information on this, you can check us out on the web at bellperformance.com or wefixfuel.com. Thanks for joining me. I'm Eric Bjornstead with Bell Performance. See you next time. Bye-bye.